So here, what we started to read most of the Hasidic insights at the bottom of page 63. And what it told us is that another Naviu had intuited something. And here's something that's a spiritual idea that we find even Talmudically, but it's kind of a rarefied idea, that when people are truly connected with their own godliness and therefore with God, their instincts are good. Their instincts take them in the right direction. For most of us, our instincts are appetites, self gratification. Trusting your instincts is not necessarily a healthy way to go. You need to have a compass that's not instinctive, that's going to be able to analyze what your instinct was and say, that's actually not good, or not good for me, or not moral, or whatever we're going to say. But there are people where they're so in one with God, where their instincts are also aligned with God. Now, there was something here about bringing incense, or bringing fire for the incense, which was a correct thing. They intuited it, but Moses hadn't taught it yet. So on the one hand, it reflects how spiritually evolved they were. There is room to say, though, that even if someone is spiritually evolved, it's not for them to jump for something that they feel is a spiritually valuable thing, but they really should wait for directions, wait for instruction. So in what we had read last week, is it said that this itself was something of a deficiency. One thing, area we didn't go last week, I maybe mentioned, not much, is that, but I think it bears some expanding now, is that there is a Torah idea of respect is huge. Respect for God, respect for our elders, respect for our teachers. So even though we don't want an austere, fearful, God forbid, relationship with teachers, elders, God, but it's the idea of the love we feel coming from there is something that's very important, but we should maintain respect. And that's very critical. And in this case, it's critical of Nadav and Avihu, these spiritually evolved people, to make sure that they respect both for Aaron, their father, and their mother, and then Moses, and for the tabernacle itself and for God. So the idea that they would, of their own accord, while Moses and Aaron are there within calling distance, they would decide the law on their own, that is seen as disrespectful. There is very clearly in the Talmud the idea that if I'm standing with a teacher of mine, and one of you or anybody comes over to ask me a question of Jewish law, I should be really reticent to quiet and allow space for my teacher to voice an opinion first. And it's the idea of not issuing a halach decision before one's teacher. Of course, if one asks the teacher, if it was one of you, my teacher would probably say, these are your people, and you take care of this. Or I might say, since I know them, I know this woman or I know this man, can I answer this? That's fine. But the idea of just jumping ahead and deciding the law was in itself something that was not considered a good thing. Now, what the way the narrative went, as far as we got, and we're on 63, and we're at the second with two paragraphs in the bottom. It starts this duality. But before we get to that, what we have already expressed is that there is this tension in life between transcendence, the desire to reach above the shallowness of human life and to connect with God, the source of holiness and godliness, right? And that's during prayer. It may be in song. I mean, there are times we have holy moments, but those holy moments tend to be very inward focused and upward focused. And our lives, the impact for our lives to have impact outside of our internal world, we need to be outward focused, downward focused to impact the world. And those two don't really go together. If you're, serving poor people in a soup kitchen, which is fantastic, you're not going to be able to be in meditation. You can enjoy it, but you got to make sure you're not spilling hot soup on someone's hands. You got to pay attention to the work, and you have to do the work. So it's possible, ideally, if you got up in the morning, I said, I have a day today, I have some time. And one prayed and said, God, I have a day. I want to do something, a mitzvah. I want to be connected to you. I want to connect to you through doing the things you want me to do. So then you sign on to a class, you go to a soup kitchen. All of that is because you had those contemplative private moments with God, and then you break away to go do what God wants of you. But they're two different rhythms. One's the upward transcendent one, the connecting one, and one is the action one, which is by definition somewhat, at least on a conscious level, never unplugging from God, but unplugging from that cocoon of meditation to be able to focus on engaging the world. So those two poles we discussed last week are very, very critical to a functional and healthy, balanced spiritual life in the way Torah describes it. And Nadav and Avihu, these two sons of Aaron, they overdid it on one end. They were so swept up in the beauty of communing with God, so enraptured by the idea of the holiness that they were engaging in, and in the tabernacle, in the presence of God. And in a way, so that it really eclipsed their value for human life, because human life is, if you want to look at it through the lens of spiritual quality, well, it's human life is shallow. Now, in the idea of God's desire for what's important for us, human life is very valuable because we can actually make a difference. But if you're thinking about the spirituality quotient, they weren't held back at all by saying, "Oh, I want to," in a vestige of saying, "I want to stay alive. I want to be down here." They wanted to cleave to God, and they did. And when their souls left their bodies, cleaving to God, it's called death. And that is, as one of the greats, the Rabbi Chaim Ben Attar, the Or HaChaim, that's how he describes the dynamics that we're speaking about here, the idea of what went on with these very evolved people. What did they do wrong? And it sounds from here is like God killed them. What he's saying is God didn't kill them. They're, because of this somewhat misdirected surge of transcendence, their souls left them. So let's look at this, finish this piece, and we can talk a little more. It says this duality of seeking inspiration by transcending the limitations of the physical world, and then applying the inspiration gained to elevating the physical world, is but one reflection of the oscillation that characterizes all life. Spiritual life has something we're going to call oscillation. Oscillation means that there's a to and a fro. There's back and forth. And the back and forth is between finding times for holy communion with God and then making sure that we have times for holy engagement of the physical world, which sometimes, if you're helping someone change a tire, it doesn't feel particularly holy, but it's very holy. So there's an oscillation between hugging God and then hugging the world. So in the words of the prophet Ezekiel, and this is a common phrase in Jewish spiritual writings, when Ezekiel has opens up with a vision of the divine dynamics that you and I can't see. And there's something, it's called a chariot. It's all metaphorical stuff, imagery, but what he sees in seeing God and godliness and the angels, one of the things he says about the angels is that they're running to and fro, or the language is, in the words of the prophet Ezekiel, the living beings were running and returning. I would actually translate it, not running, but like lunging upward and returning. And so what does that mean? These angels are lunging or running and returning. Part of it is that the angels, they don't have the shades, the limits, the filters that we all have. So we're looking, we feel God. We have God in our mind's eye, so to speak. We feel close to God. If you're not seeing godliness up, in a real way, in a tangible way, angels can. And that's why in our morning prayers every day, as the lead up to the Shema, part of it is about this very thing. The idea of the excitement that the angels feel in wanting to get closer to God. Why do we care about angels? And why are they in our morning prayers? Because angels are individualized beings. Angels have names. Angels have a particular identity, like you and I. Difference is that they know that their identity is totally dependent on God, and totally they feel like they're rays of the sun to God's son. You and I feel like we're me. I'm me. I don't feel born. I don't feel like I'm going to die. I have the logic, and the experience of life tells me that that's going to the way it's going to be. I exist, but the innate feeling is that I exist. And then maybe God exists, and we can work on that. But our sense of self is very much that we are the pure existence. And angels don't have that. Angels know off the bat very clearly that their existence is but as an expression of God's desire in their existence. So for angels, they see the beauty of being totally subsumed within the greater sun, so to speak, if they see themselves as rays of the sun, and they cleave to God. But then every angel has something to do. An angel has a job to do. They're mechanisms in the divine flow. So they've got to get back to work. But then they go back to connect with God. So that's the language that Ezekiel says, is that the angels are running to and fro. in Jewish spirituality, we say that's really that's the rhythm of divine connection in the entire world. There's godliness, our souls, and the godliness in the world, but there's this constant oscillation of connecting with the source and then getting back to work. So what it says here, which is interpreted to mean all life exhibits running and returning motion. Okay. Again, I would have translated it a little different, but that's fine. Physically, this oscillation is manifest in the inhalation and exhalation of the lungs, as well as in this systole and diastole of the heart. Physically, so listen, you breathe in and you breathe out. Breathe in is more, I guess, gathering, connecting in, and then breathe out it's more an engagement of the world. So that's kind of a little bit of a physiological expression of this idea of the oscillation, the running and returning. In spiritual terms, the health of the soul requires periodic oscillation between world-forsaking flights of inspiration and world-affirming dedication to our divine mission. The health of the soul requires we have to sometimes just leave the world behind. That's what prayer is supposed to be. We have responsibilities, we have relationships, they're all very, very important. But for prayer, we shut out the world. It's about me and God. And when I'm connected with God, then I have a clearer perspective and mission of how to treat my responsibilities, my relationships, and so on. But when the tasks of those responsibilities are just consistently taking up my field of vision, then my compass can get skewed. So prayer is about rising above the trees, so to speak, to connect with God and think about who does God create me to be? What does God want of me? What is it that I can accomplish? What's my potential? Where am I meeting my potential? And then come out of prayer energized to hit the ground running. But first we need to be able to divest ourselves of all the static that comes with just being alive. So we say it's periodic oscillation between world-forsaking flights of inspiration, I think that's nicely worded, and world-affirming dedication to our divine mission. Inasmuch as the purpose of creation is to make the physical world into God's home. Since, what's the bottom line? Why did God create the world? Did God create the world in order to have souls who are totally cleaving to the divine and connecting with holiness? That's not what we're told. God created the world to have human beings who will make the world a better place. So if that's the case, the purpose of creation is to make the physical world into God's home. We are bidden to undertake our runs, our temporary departure from worldly pursuits to renew our inspiration expressly for the purpose of enhancing our returns. Prayer is not about running away from the world. Prayer is not saying, I need rest from all the hassle, and this is going to be my meditation. That's not really the element of prayer. Prayer is about connecting with God, trying to get past the layers and the distractions to my connecting with God, because I want to have a clearer and more empowered way forward in making the world better. So it's really all about the engagement of the world. And if you remember last week, I mentioned about the Rabbi Akiva, who was described as having gone into this spiritual state, entering in peace and exiting in peace. And as the Rebbe pointed out, one might say that the reason he was able to come out of that spiritual state in peace, where his colleagues did not, is because he entered in peace. He knew that he was not entering into an altered state of consciousness to run away from the shallowness of the world, or just to cleave to God. He knew that he was cleaving to God and enveloping himself in God and embracing God because he wanted to be a better Rabbi Akiva and engage the world. It was all about the life he was living as a human being. By so doing, we'll ensure that that we will sense the preeminence of the return over the run and thereby protected from the sort of unchecked run that results in total departure from this world. In this context, Nadav and Avihu's sin consisted of emphasizing the run at the expense of the return. They were spiritualists. They wanted to connect with God, and they de-emphasized the return, which is why their souls left them. And pursuing the run for its own sake, rather than as onto 65, rather than as a prelude to the subsequent return. Therefore, after this incident, God forbade drinking wine to intoxication. What does that mean? Drinking the inner dimensions of the Torah in a way that leads to the rapturous exploration of the soul and the abandonment of our divine mission. So this is a classic Hasidic or mystical position that even though within the spiritual streams of Torah, there are certainly those who have been much more ascetic and transcendence focused, certainly at least within the Hasidic world and within at least some of the mystical world, it's always has to be focused on the bottom line of any spiritual experience has to be with, okay, so now how's the world going to benefit from this? It's not about what feels good for my soul. It does feel good for my soul, but the idea is what God wants, and God wants us to impact the world. So now I might expand on this a little bit more, but I want to just go a little bit further, meanwhile, in the verses. So let's go back to 63. This incense offering did indeed elicit a revelation of the divine presence, similar to the one that had just occurred. Fire went forth from before God, from the Holy of Holies. However, in this case, because Nadav and Avihu had offered the incense improperly, what the impropriety was, we've discussed the different possibilities. The fire issued in the form of two pairs of flames that entered their nostrils and consumed them, meaning their souls leaving their bodies and clothing intact. Their souls just left. Thus they died there before God. We'll go to 64 now. Seeing that they died, Moses said to Aaron, comforting him, this is evidently what God spoke about when he said, I will be sanctified through the example I will make of those whom I have chosen to be nearest to me, and in this way, the same way, I will be honored before all the people. This is we don't actually have such a verse in the Torah, but Moses is saying to Aaron, we both know that God said there's going to be a tabernacle. And that tabernacle is really, really important. And in order for the people to understand the gravity of how to act in the tabernacle in God's home, I'm going to sanctify myself through those closest to me. That's the language God used, which means that somehow it be an example through those closest to me. Krovai is the language in Hebrew. Nearest to me. So I assumed, Moses continues in the non-bolded, this meant that when a tabernacle would be inaugurated, either you or I would die in punishment for some misdeed, that we weren't properly respectful of the tabernacle, and people would learn their lesson in order to demonstrate how seriously the service of God must be taken. After all, if God punishes preeminently righteous people, he will certainly punish those who are less righteous. But apparently, Aaron, my brother, your two eldest sons were more righteous than either of us. God chose them as the example. They are the ones who fit the bill of those closest to me. And for that reason, God chose to teach the people this crucial lesson by making an example of them rather than of us. In fact, your two remaining sons are also apparently more righteous than we are, since all four of your sons had been sentenced to die as your punishment for your role in the incident of the golden calf, which we discussed. My prayers at that time commuted this punishment by half. The fact that Nadav and Avihu died this way indicates that the other two sons, Elazar and Isamar, were slated to die similarly. So this is what he says to Aaron, who has just lost two of his kids. One can only imagine the horror of that. And the Torah goes on to say, Aaron and his sons, it says Aaron, but we add in here his sons, based on Rashi and the commentaries. They were silent, accepting God's decree and Moses' consolation. Okay, so here, this opens up an area of discussion that is not an easy one. Talking about dealing with death. And it's no matter what one says about when someone has just lost a loved one, what are you supposed to say? Nothing you can say will bring them back. And that's the only thing that really will soothe the wound. What can you possibly say? And at one level, there's nothing you can say. And that's why when we go to Shiva, we're told you don't speak to the mourner until the mourner speaks to you, because you're not there to say brilliant words. There aren't many brilliant words to say. You're there to show that you care and to bring company and let the mourner know that they're not alone and that you're with them in their pain. And if they want to talk about things, they can talk, to follow their lead. You're not there to say magic words that's going to take away the pain. It's not really possible. But where does the Torah say is the place for the mourner to go? It says Aaron and his sons were silent. The ideal, it's not an ideal situation, but ideally, the mourners are able to accept reality, a new reality. They're able to accept that they live in God's world, and some things are beyond their capacity to control, including usually the passing of this person, and recognize that the soul is not gone, and God has not abandoned them, and the relationship will continue in a different way. It's not satisfying to have a relationship with the soul when you can't see the person smile. And that's why this is Shiva. Torah says it's a tragedy. But after experiencing the tragedy and the sitting of the Shiva, the Torah wants the person to go is to a sense of acceptance, if they can get there. And acceptance is within acceptance that God is still with them, the person, their loved one, is still with them, and even more so in our 13 principles of faith, that loved one will also one day live again, called resurrection of the dead. So the finality of the disconnect is mitigated through faith, through our faith, in recognizing that it's nothing random. God's in control. It's not final, because burying the body doesn't mean burying the soul. The soul is still connected to a loved one, and even as far as its connection with the body. So there is there's a struggle we go through in dealing with, God forbid, with our own losses, or in comforting people with losses. Sometimes, it's smartest to say nothing as far as the loss is concerned. There's a medrash tells us that a great rabbi lost a child, and one great rabbi came to visit him, and said, Adam and Eve lost a child when Cain killed Abel, and they were able to find comfort, and they had more kids. God should bless you. You should be able to find comfort. And the rabbi said, I just lost my son. Why do you? So you need to pour salt in the wounds. Tell me that Adam and Eve also lost a child. Why are you adding to my pain by telling me about someone else's pain? Another rabbi offered that Job, the famous book of Job, with all the tzaddis and the pain he had, lost children, in one case with a tornado that hit the house and killed his kids. And he was able to find peace. The rabbi says, I'm in the middle of my own pain. Why you bother me about Job's issues? Another rabbi says, look at Aaron. Aaron lost two sons. But he was able to, he was quiet, he accepted it, and he was able to go forward. Same response. Well, don't bother me with Aaron's problems. I got my own problems. It says King David. Another one says, another rabbi says, look, King David and Bathsheba, when King David married Bathsheba, which was not totally a proper marriage in the way David handled it. And their first baby died. And then they were able to go on, have another baby, King Solomon, and so on. They were able to find peace and comfort. He said, why are you telling me that? I don't. Why do I have to? You have to exacerbate my pain with their pain. And finally, Rabbi comes in and tells them, it says, God gave you, in your child, God gave you entrusted you with something very, very precious. And you returned, and you did a great job as a parent, and your son did a great job in life, and he returned his soul to its maker. You returned to God, his object, so to speak, in perfect and improved shape. And to that, the rabbi said, you have comforted me. So there are a lot of lessons there. One lesson is sometimes it happens, and I hear it myself sometimes. People, you don't know, what are you going to say? Someone's they're in pain. It's awkward. Start talking about someone else who had passed away from the same thing. It's well-intentioned trying to find things to say, but why should this person who just lost a loved one, why do they care about someone else's pain exactly? I mean, they may care about it, but it doesn't do anything to heal the wound. To the contrary. So some commentaries say it's like the first one about Cain and Abel. Here they say, listen, he was murdered. So in the case of someone who lost, is where it seems kind of random. Try to look at that and say, listen, it was out of your control. He dismissed that. The one is an act of nature, tornado, fate. Dismissed that too. With Aaron, it was that the kids themselves did something off. Not another interview like we just discussed. So nobody wants to hear that their kid was part of their own demise. And with King David and Bathsheba, it was because something the parents did. Because that union itself was an issue. It's also not something to tell anybody. What is it? The idea is that there is a soul. And life is a journey and an exercise for all of us. And if were able to properly engage that journey and had a meaningful journey in life, the soul goes back to its creator, in the sense that it's enveloped in the creator, not doesn't leave us, but now more into a purely spiritual condition, actualized, stronger than it came to the world. And that's a beautiful thing when someone has lived a meaningful life. Moving on is painful, but there's a certain, hopefully, a certain comfort that comes from the idea that this loved one accomplished, made a mark. Is the world is different because they were here. We wish they were here longer. It's fine. That's correct, and it's painful not to have them. But hopefully, eventually, to adjust the idea that the person's not gone, their human journey is over, but the human journey was successful, and we will once again see each other. That's really, I think, a message of the Medrash there. And here with Aaron, the first step he says he was silent. He accepted. Let's just read some more of the verses here. So in verse number 4, on page 64, Moses summoned his cousins Mishael and Eltzaphan, the sons of his and Aaron's uncle Uziel, and said to them, in order not to allow the sadness of this tragedy to mitigate our joy over the dedication of God's tabernacle, draw near and carry your dead kinsman from before the sanctuary to outside of the camp. So he's telling his cousins, to their cousins, to come and now they're to the bodies there. In Torah thinking, dead bodies, it's a mitzvah to deal with dead bodies, but touching the dead bodies, because as I think it was discussed, godliness is life, and engaging the dead bodies is going to be throwing that off kilter, so to speak. So then he needed other people, he needed cousins to go, or other people to go take out the bodies. In order not to allow the sadness of this joy to mitigate to mitigate our joy over the dedication of God's tabernacle, draw near and carry dead kinsmen from before the sanctuary to outside of the camp. True, it would seem that since you are Levites, you should not ritually defile yourselves today, because doing so will prevent you from participating further in the celebration of the inauguration of the tabernacle. But inasmuch as the bodies must be removed in order for the celebration to continue, removing them can be considered an essential part of the celebration itself, and is therefore fitting that you be the ones to do this, specifically because you were Levites, the officiants of the tabernacle. And yes, God himself disrupted the celebration by punishing your relatives immediately, rather than waiting until another day, which would have been more convenient. But for our part, we must do our best not to allow the mood to be dampened any more than he has deemed necessary. This being the case, I would ordinarily have asked Elazar and Asama to tend to the dead brothers, since they are obligated to do so. Brothers are mourners, and it should be a mitzvah to take care of their dead brothers. But since they have been specifically commanded not to leave the tabernacle precincts today, they cannot remove them, because once they remove them, they touch the dead bodies, and they can remain within the tabernacle precincts. So Mishal and Eltzaphan approached and carried Nadav and Avihu, who were still dressed in their intact priestly tunics, to outside the camp as Moses had spoken. Now Moses says to Aaron and to his sons Elazar and Asama, those mourning the death of close relatives, even priests, must let their hair grow uncut for at least 30 days. This is an inference of a law that we have in today's morning, MOUR, and that people do not cut their hair, mourners do not cut their hair for 30 days. So it's inferred from what we see in a second. Generally, mourners must let their hair grow uncut for at least 30 days and rend their garments as an expression of mourning. The high priest, however, must not observe these practices. Inasmuch as all three of you are being installed as priests and thereby participating in the inauguration of God's tabernacle, it is not appropriate for any of you to dampen the joy of the celebration by observing mourning practices. For this reason, The stringencies that normally apply only to the high priest apply today to all three of you. So you treat like high priest, you will not do the normal morning rites because right now we need you to be part of this, the joy in the tabernacle. Therefore, do not let your head's hair grow, and do not rend your garments. Again, it's the ripping of the garments, and this is something that is part of Jewish law also. It's something I have to deal with in funerals all the time. In America, it's commonly the people commonly done that people take a pin with a black ribbon and then tear the ribbon. That's not tearing clothing. So I don't, they're going through enough, so I don't make a big issue out of it. But I always want offer this idea of taking an old article of clothing to wear at the cemetery and we'll rip it, which is the right way to do it. And if they want to wear it, they wear it. I won't. I'm not part of ripping the black ribbon because it doesn't mean anything, but to me, but in Jewish law. But here's where it is: rending the garments it's about tearing clothing. Now you don't want to wear it to ruin a good suit. Sure, so find something that can, but the tearing itself symbolizes the tearing of the physical part of the relationship. It says, so do not act like normal mourners. Don't let your hair grow. Don't tear your garments so that you not die. For doing so will be accounted a capital offense, unless to be angry with the entire community. Right now, this is a special time. Rather, let your brothers, the entire house of Israel, bewail the conflagration that God has burned. I was just last night. I went into Crown Heights for a shiva of someone, a family I know very well. Father is 89 years old, passed away, and we were sitting there. The extended family had a simcha the night, and he passed away. The deceased 93-year-old brother was scheduled to be performing his granddaughter's wedding that night, and now he has to sit shiva. So for certain, in Jewish law, we say that the bride comes first, and therefore he went to as difficult as it must have been, he went to perform the wedding for his granddaughter. I think is she a great granddaughter? There's a granddaughter, and only afterwards began with the shiva. Rather, let your brothers, the entire house of Israel, bewail the conflagration that God has burned, meaning the death of your family members interceding on your behalf. This will also serve as a precedent that the community must participate in the sorrow of its leaders when they are in mourning. So we'll just turn to 65 quickly. At the top it says, and as you have been commanded and similar to a high priest, do not go out of the entrance of the tent of meeting lest you die, because God's anointed oil has been placed upon you, and they did according to Moses' order. Let's just do the next piece. God addressed the following legal passage to Aaron directly, rather than through Moses. Usually God commanded Aaron through Moses. Moses was the interface. In reward for his having accepted God's punishment of the sons without protest, God spoke to Aaron saying, do not drink wine in such a way that will lead to intoxication. Neither you nor your sons with you, neither when you enter the tent of meeting nor when you approach the outer altar, so that you not die, for doing so is a capital offense. This is an eternal statute for your generations. Only when you are sober is there any reason to distinguish between which actions render the sacrifices you offer up holy and which disqualify them, rendering them profane, and between priests who are ritually defiled and therefore unfit for service, and those who are not ritually defiled and therefore fit for service. Whereas if you are intoxicated, whatever sacrificial rites you perform are automatically disqualified, even if you perform them correctly and are undefiled when you perform them. Intoxication is not a Jewish value. I know observant people saying l'chaim. Saying l'chaim is one thing, getting intoxicated is something else. Getting drunk is never holy. Similarly, only a sober person is fit to instruct the Israelites regarding all the statutes that God has spoken to them through Moses. An intoxicated person is unfit to teach. Nevertheless, a sage who does render a legal decision while intoxicated is not subject to the death penalty, as are priests who officiate while intoxicated. I'm going to leave this here. So take most of the questions, and I would like to blow the shofar and wish you all a good year, because we're up against Rosh Hashanah now.
Mendy,
Yes, you have a question?
Yeah, I have several.
Good.
Since we were talking about angels, so are angels people that passed away and they've reached a high, such a high level that they become angels, or just angels? Or
No, angels are not people. Angels are totally different.
so they were never
creation.
humans. They were never humans.
No.
And when we do die, I don't know if you know the answer to this. Do you get reunited with your loved ones, or you don't? It's like they never existed.
See, there's that connection with loved ones. Yes.
And this is an old one, and because since I left New Jersey, I was always told in Florida that God is not a punishing God, and yet today it referred to that.
Because it definitely does show up. This is not the only place it shows up in the Torah, but here too, especially in the way we read it, the idea that no one should ever say that God is not a God who gives consequences. But punishing means to, I think punitive means that this is to try to, to hurt, to get them back, so to speak, for what they did. We don't believe in that. The idea that there are consequences for our actions, for sure, there are. And here we said it very simply. Here, the way we read it, wasn't even God involved with it. The souls just left.
Didn't you say that God punished?
The language of it was punished because it does show up. I'm not arguing with their language, because the idea is that God allowed it, and sometimes there is that idea of that the soul, which is going to continue to exist, it needs to have its lesson, or the lesson that learned from by the people around it. But that's not called punitive.
I see. Okay, that's the part that confused. Thank you.
And I just have a question.
Sure.
This is Lori. When you
Yeah.
had mentioned when we're in prayer, some days are less static and there are other days that are more. Any tips for getting rid of some of that static when you can? I know this is probably a question you've been asked many times, but I just thought maybe any suggestions. I know you try to refocus and
Yeah, it's a battle that and there, I don't think there's any one specific way out of this, but I think we want, even envisioning ourselves. I think I've mentioned before that the Talmudic architectural advice is that one go through two doorways when one comes into a house of prayer, like we have here. The first doorway is to envision oneself as leaving, unburdening themselves, leaving their non-prayer self behind. They're more busy, confused, anxious, whatever self behind. And then the second doorway is to enter enter prayer. So really, prayer, just getting into prayer, saying, so I'm going to sit down and pray, that's probably not going to work well. It really takes some meditation before you get into prayer. And the meditation is to put the anxieties, the things pulling at us, and say, you're real. I'm going to hang you on a hook right now. I'll get back to you. Right now, I got to talk about me. It's a battle, but it's a battle that can be won.
That's so interesting you say that about two doorways. I have a house and the kitchen is closed and then it opens up into I've got another set of doors that opens up into a sunroom with lots of windows. And that room is just so much easier to pray and, focus rather than being inside my house. It's still inside my house, the sunroom, but there's another set of doorways.
It's, it makes a lot of sense to me. And if there's something more tangible and spatial, we say we're leaving one part of our persona so that we can enter a different zone. It's very helpful.
That's so interesting that you said that, because when it's beautiful out, like when I can stand the cold, I pray outside. And yet when I'm at shul, I feel comforted that I'm praying with everyone inside.
I can see both of those. I love praying outside. The problem praying outside, there's a caution, there are many distractions. Okay, but I love not, just me and the world, me and God, me and nature. So, but being with people is its own, it's a very good focusing mechanism too, unless they're talking to you. So, but if there's communal prayer, it adds energy and it's focus.
But when I go outside, I don't feel like the birds chirping or even a car going by or plane flying. I don't find those distracting at all. It's the people in the back when they're talking that, but outside it just seems so
natural. Yeah.
Natural and more peaceful, even if there is ambient noise.
I got it. I'm with you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm going to blow the show for now. Wish you all a wonderful new year.
Thank
And
you.
Thank you,
get in
Rabbi.
touch next time we meet, because Tuesdays are going to be kind of rough for a while.
Okay, well, we'll see you in the synagogue.
We'll
God
see you
willing, yes.
there. That's right.
Hope to
Inside.
see you here. Good point.
Right.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Be well.
Thank you.
Shana
Bye-bye.
Tova. Shana